want to talk a little bit more about this issue of the experience of free will and how we talk about the nature of the deterministic world and then what human experience is and how it relates to that. And I think the best way to do this is to probably respond to Amendum's most recent video response to me. Now I'm going to play a little tiny clip here, just a couple of seconds that are toward I guess the latter part of that video, and I'm asking people here because I think Gary's right that I am very concerned about language and language use, but I want people to listen very, very carefully to the actual words that Gary uses. I mean, just listen carefully to the words, okay?
I mean, Professor Anton even said in his video, he just conceded the point that, okay, well, maybe determinism is the truth. Maybe that's the way the universe works, but we can't see it, so therefore we can pretend it isn't the truth anymore. It's just so bogus. We should try to incorporate into our language fair treatment of the truth.
Okay, I think that's good enough right there. Try and fair. Now, there's a list of words that I hope that people heard. I heard them in there. The words were can, pretend, concede, maybe, try, fair. He used so many words that smuggle in the exact issue that I'm talking about. The point that I was trying to suggest is that the human experience is one that, because of language and the way language opens us to time, somehow transforms what we call the natural transpiring of deterministic process. I'm not suggesting that humans are pretending not to be determined. I guess what I'm trying to get at is the kind of complexity within a fully deterministic universe such that human experience would have to modify what that would mean. The word doesn't make any sense. That's part of the point. That is, we could say it's fully deterministic, but when we say fully, well, then what is a partly deterministic world? Now, again, I'm not saying that you weren't on that. I think you were partly suggesting, yeah, some of this is obviously a problem. It's like the language itself is confusing us, but I think that's part of the issue. And I don't think you can just get rid of that. Now, I want to say a couple things about this and then move into my response even more so, which is we have been able to put a person on the moon. We have been able to do genetic engineering and to clone organisms, and we have been able to create an atomic bomb, but we still don't have any computer software packages that allow it to hear the spoken word and then transcribe that into text. That to me is fascinating. I think part of what that is the lack of a rigorous notion of context within all of human culture, the scientific community, the linguistic community. The issue of context is the bugbear. Now, let me see if I can get into this even more. Now, Gary was talking about 10 most important facts that he would like to have people get at. I don't know if I have 10 here, but let me see if I can walk through some basic facts that I would want to offer up. And these are what I would call facts. Part of this is I guess my number one fact, and this is part of the problem of it all, is that, and this is Korzybski's line, which is whatever I say a thing is, it is not. There's something about language which, if you get too literal minded about it, you're going to end up going goofy. That is, language it's useful and it enables us to go on from here in various ways, but if you have too literal of a notion of truth, and by that I mean a one-to-one correspondence between these things in language that we're going to call stated facts, and then these things out there in the world, whatever that means, called observed facts, and a correspondence theory between them. If that's what we mean by truth, I guess this argument's going to go nowhere. I would suggest that reality, whatever the hell we mean by that word, is some kind of it's beyond what we could directly experience. That first, your senses are involved in abstracting processes from the totality of all that's around. There's magnetic waves, there's gravitational forces, there's electromagnetic spectrum. There's all kinds of things going around that we don't even register. pheromones, chemical communication going on. Like if you watch the way that trees release pheromones and the way that trees intercommunicate, the way that again, we don't even have to get into other organisms, but I think the point is that humans, their sensory organs abstract, and then language is a further abstraction from that. So to imagine that words will somehow hook onto reality is already goofy, perhaps from the get-go. Okay, so let me see if I can give some other basic axioms. Again, within that whole context of, part of the problem is that we're using words that we have to use more loosely and openly, and to see if we can't see the meaning of the terms as part of the truth that we're after. I think that Gary suggests that we need to get at this issue of truth. I would say, okay, humans are not machines. I've heard so much word choice like programming and machines and stuff. No, machines were made. Machines were created and they were designed. We are not machines. I don't know where that language keeps coming in, and that to me is it's a very problematic term. Let me see if I can further that out. First, this is my number one fact. There has never, ever been a human independent of the entire cosmos. Fact number one. There has never, ever been a human independent of the entire cosmos. Okay. Second fact. Humans are natural to the world, but their nature demands a redefinition of what we mean by the natural. That is, humans have been too often set at over against the natural. It was partly religious dogma, other forms of, I guess it does have to do with mathematics and problems of mathematical realities. I think if there is a one-to-one correspondence in language, it has to do with mathematical language and mathematical objects, not with anything in the empirical world. This is why the discussion of the eidetic realm and the realm of mathematics is so important, because this is where you do get some of these correspondence theories of language that have a kind of robust coherence to them. But as soon as you move to the wiggly, ever-evolving, aging world that has entropy as part of its conditions, no, it's not going to work. Language is never going to be able to keep up with it, and so language is always a little bit behind the world that's freshly breaking into itself. Okay, next fact. The fact is that isolated atomistic individuals, that is, individuals who are fully separated off and sufficing to themselves, are an illusion. Yes, brain will never suffice for what we mean by human experience. That is, there's never been a brain independent of the person that it's in and independent of the entire cosmos in which it's making sense of it. Okay, here's next fact. This is the fact, and this goes back to this issue of language translation and computer technologies, which is context is perhaps one of the most important aspects of communication and language, and yet context, as of yet, has not been and seems almost unable to be rigorously confined to a scientific definition. That is, you could try to say what context is, and we could try to haggle about what context is, but there's some sense in which context is inseparable from history. That is, what we mean by the very historicity of human consciousness is part of the context. Words transcend even your own memory of them, and this is part of that problem that there's never just an isolated individual. When you speak, you always mean more and less than what you say, because the words were never yours to begin with. Words are not private property, and to that extent, again, you can invoke words that others can know meanings for. They could be familiar with the original coinage of that term. There's countless examples of this, right? I've shot videos before where I've talked about some of the problems of language where words are over-sedimented with meanings and they're overpopulated, and those meanings come into play independent, oftentimes, and beyond a person's conscious control. They often say more than they intended to. So context will be a problem, especially the more that people think that they're going to be able to define context independent of history itself. And what do we mean by that? Again, it gets to be very large. Okay, next point is that reductionism, when followed too far, becomes oversimplification. I fear that some of the arguments that Gary is suggesting, as much as I find some of the things insightful, I find a very fearful reductionism. Reminds me of Mark Sideritz. He had a wonderful poster on his wall which said, any philosophy that can be put in a nutshell should stay there. Yeah, I mean, there's something about it that just seems really degenerate to reduce it all that way. But again, we're trying to do this just to lay some facts on the table. So again, in the spirit of some of this reductivism, uh, next fact would be negation. And by that I mean lots of forms of negation. Simple statement of don't. It could be propositional logic, where you give negative statements of what is not the case. Experiences of absence and lack, desire writly large and then articulated. All of those must be included in the real. If you want to get to what real is, you're going to have to address the problem of negation. And this is not just an issue of humans, because humans are part of nature. See, this goes back to that early discussion about, well, humans are natural, but then we need to redefine what we mean by nature. Okay, related to the issue of negation, I would argue, again with Burke, please people try to clarify this, all moral terms are polar. That is, it doesn't mean that all polar terms are moral, but all moral terms are polar. That is, we have a sense of morality that's partly related to our experience of time, which itself has the felt experience of either or options or deliberation. That is, there's senses of, if I say the word justice, then it means unjust. If I say good, it's defined by not being, not being bad. Each of those words, they have an implied temporal admonishment smuggled in them. And I think that's what I would really try to say. I was listening to your video, Gary, and I think this would be a wonderful, some person could probably get a doctoral dissertation if they would go onto YouTube right now and take all of our videos on free will and determinism, transcribe them, and then look for words which we don't notice it at first pass, but include some kind of sense of free will within them. I started to make a list when you started to talk. Among the many words that you had used, again, we already talked about some of them, but some of the other ones you used were imperative, preference, decide, like, contrivance, think, believe, should. What does the word believe or should or think mean for someone who embraces a fully deterministic universe? Now, right there, I even said fully embraces. What does the word fully embraces even mean in a fully deterministic universe? There's a sense in which it's impossible to use human language with its temporal experience and then deny your experience of freedom. The word deny smuggles it back in. Can't you see it? It seems almost obvious. Okay, I think maybe the last thing that I'll say just to end is, I'm not sure if I would want the world that's being described to be adopted by lawyers for Gary. That is, Gary, are you suggesting that we can't make legal distinctions between premeditated acts that we want to say a person is culpable for because they bear a responsibility through some kind of choice? Here would be my argument that other organisms, do they communicate? Oh, yes, they do. Do they talk with themselves? I don't know. But there is a fact. People do. People talk with themselves, and as soon as they are self-aware enough to be able to have a conversation with themselves, they're now responsible for talking to themselves about how they have been, quotes, conditioned and programmed. And to the extent that they can call it into question, they are guilty for not having acted upon what they've logically and thoughtfully interrogated. If a person comes to realize certain, degenerate aspects about their culture, whether it's their diet or television watching or whatever it is, I think they could say, well, I've just been programmed that way to do this stuff. But there's another sense we want to say, no, you have been enabled to talk to yourself, and part of that includes the capacity to interrogate those beliefs and then adjust your life accordingly. People do make decisions. People do change some of their practices. I watch some people struggle with choosing to give up smoking, choosing to quit drink coffee, all kinds of things where it seems as if to simply say, well, they're determined to flounder around in between, it seems kind of odd. It's kind of an odd argument. Why why do lawyers make such a big deal out of the notion of intention? What is that? I mean, why does it relate to lots and lots of you know basic privileges? I mean, not only money, but whether or not you're going to go to jail. I mean, people have a very real sense of intention. It must be for some reason. Okay, thank you.